The first thing the German sentry heard was a faint, whispering sound, like silk tearing in the darkness high above. He squinted into the inky blackness over the Eastern Front, 1942. No roar of engines, no screaming dives, just a soft, ghostly rustle. Then the first explosion bloomed in the fuel depot, then another. By the time the air raid sirens began to wail, it was already over. The attackers had vanished as silently as they came. The next morning, a captured German officer, his face still smudged with soot, would tell his Soviet interrogators of a new, terrifying rumor spreading through the Wehrmacht ranks. They were not being attacked by planes, he insisted. They were being hunted by witches, women who flew on broomsticks made of wood and canvas, who could turn off their engines and glide to their targets in deathly silence. They called them the Nachthexen. June 1941. Operation Barbarossa. The Nazi war machine tears into the Soviet Union with a fury the world had never seen. 3 million German soldiers, thousands of tanks and aircraft, surge across the border. The Red Air Force is caught on the ground, decimated. Within days, the Luftwaffe owns the sky. Soviet cities burn, and the army is in a desperate, bloody retreat. The very survival of the Soviet state hangs by a thread. In Moscow, the situation is dire. Every man, every piece of equipment is thrown into the grinder of the front lines. In this cauldron of existential threat, an idea is born. Marina Raskova, a Soviet aviation celebrity known as the Russian Amelia Earhart, is a national hero. A beautiful, determined woman with a pilot's steely gaze, she had set long-distance flying records before the war. Now her desk is piled with letters, thousands of them. They are from young women, students, factory workers, farmers, all demanding the same thing, the right to fight for their motherland. They quote Soviet doctrine of equality. They beg. They threaten to go to the front anyway. Raskova sees not just passion, but a resource. With men dying by the thousands, perhaps the women could fill a critical gap. Using her unparalleled political connections, Raskova goes straight to the top. She argues, she pleads, she demands. And against all odds, Joseph Stalin himself gives the order. The Soviet Union will form the first all-female combat aviation regiments in history. Order number 0099 creates the 588th Night Bomber Regiment. The news spreads like wildfire. From every corner of the vast country, they come. Young women, some still in their teens, leaving their homes, their universities, their families. They arrive at the Engels Air Base on the Volga River, their faces a mixture of determination, excitement, and sheer terror. They are about to become soldiers. The reality of their new life is a brutal shock. The base at Engels is sparse and freezing. Their uniforms are hand-me-downs from male soldiers, ill-fitting and coarse. The food is meager, and then they are shown their aircraft. It is not a sleek, modern fighter. It is the Polikarpov Po-2, a biplane, made of wood, stretched canvas, and wire. It was designed in the 1920s as a training and crop-dusting aircraft. It has an open cockpit, no radio, no armor, no brakes, and a top speed slower than a modern car. The German pilots flying their Messerschmitt Bf-109s with their enclosed cockpits and powerful cannons would laugh. But the Po-2 had hidden virtues. Its maximum speed was its greatest weapon. Because it was so slow, it could fly dangerously low underneath German radar coverage. Its stall speed was so low that it could maneuver in ways no German fighter could follow. Trying to shoot down a Po-2 in a BF-109 was like trying to shoot a mosquito with a rifle, and its wooden construction made it nearly invisible to infrared detection. But these were just theories. The women had to learn to fly it as a weapon. Their commander, a tough, no-nonsense veteran named Yevdokia Bershanskaya, drills them mercilessly. They practice night flying until they are ready to drop from exhaustion. The training is brutal. They are taught to navigate by the stars and by landmarks, as their planes have no sophisticated instruments. They practice their signature tactic, the silent glide. They would fly to a point miles from their target, then cut their engine. The only sound would be the wind whistling through the wires and struts of their frail craft. Gliding silently in the dark, they would release their bombs, then restart the engine and flee before the Germans could pinpoint their location. It required incredible nerve and precision. A single misjudgment meant a crash. The male pilots at the base mock them. They call them little princesses and doubt they will last a week at the front. The women of the 588th use the mockery as fuel. In the spring of 1942, the 588th is sent to the front lines in the Caucasus. Their first mission is a disaster. The lead plane, piloted by Irina Sabrova and her navigator, gets lost in a sudden storm. They fly blindly through lightning and driving rain, their maps rendered useless. They barely avoid crashing into a mountainside. Another plane is caught in searchlights and riddled with anti-aircraft fire, managing to limp back to base on a prayer. The returning pilots are shaken, some in tears. The male commanders scoff, ready to write off the entire experiment, but Raskova and Bershanskaya will not let them quit. They analyze every mistake, every second of the failed mission. They adapt, they learn, they grow harder. Their second mission is a success, then a third. They develop a relentless tempo. On a typical summer night, each two-woman crew would fly between 8 and 18 missions. They would land, their faces numb with cold, their muscles aching. Ground crews, also women, would swarm the plane, refueling it, reloading the small bombs under the wings, often lifting the 50-kilogram munitions themselves. The pilot and navigator would gulp down a cold tea, report, and then take off again, back into the darkness. There was no rest. They were a constant gnawing presence. The German reaction begins to shift. At first, it was amusement, then annoyance, then sheer frustration. A lone Po-2 would drop a few small bombs on a supply depot, barely causing damage, but ruining the sleep of an entire battalion. The psychological effect was immense. The constant, unpredictable attacks meant no German soldier behind the lines ever felt safe. Sleep became a precious commodity. The sentries, jumpy and exhausted, would fire at shadows. The legend of the Nachthexen, the night witches, was born. Any unexplained sound in the night was blamed on them. They were credited with supernatural powers. The life of a night witch was a study in hardship and ingenuity. They lived in dugouts, often with water seeping through the walls. They battled frostbite in the open cockpits, the temperature dropping to 40 below zero. Their only navigation tools were a map, a compass, a stopwatch, and a flashlight. The navigator had to balance the map on her knees, often flying upside down, or in evasive maneuvers. They carried pistols, but no parachutes. The command reasoned that at the low altitudes they flew, a parachute would be useless. It was a death sentence if their flimsy plane was hit. It was a calculated risk to save weight. Their tactics were as innovative as they were daring. They flew in formations of 3. 2 planes would fly in as decoys, drawing the searchlights and flak fire. They would weave and dodge, while the 3rd plane, unseen, would glide silently to the target and release its bombs. Then they would switch roles. The German gunners on the ground grew to hate the distinctive sound of the Po-2's puttering engine. It was a sound that promised another sleepless night, another attack of nerves. For shooting down a night witch, the German High Command allegedly awarded an Iron Cross. It was a prize few would ever claim. The women themselves were a fascinating mix. There was Nadezhda Popova, a bold and charismatic pilot who would fly multiple missions a night. There was Yekaterina Ryabova, a navigator of incredible calm and precision. They were young women who wrote poetry, fell in love, and darned each other's stockings. In one dugout, they might be discussing Pushkin. In the next, they were planning a bombing run on a German headquarters. They maintained their humanity in the midst of hell. They developed a fierce, sisterly bond, a loyalty that meant they would risk everything to find a comrade who had gone missing. As the legend of the night witches grew, so did the German efforts to destroy them. The Luftwaffe deployed its best night fighters, but the Po-2 was a nightmare to engage. Its top speed was lower than the stall speed of a Messerschmitt Bf 109 or a Junkers Ju 88. A German pilot who tried to get a Po-2 in his sights would overshoot in an instant. If he slowed down too much, his plane would stall and crash. Some frustrated German pilots, in a desperate move, tried to simply fly over the Po-2 and chop it to pieces with their propeller. It was a tactic of last resort, and it rarely worked. The Germans then set up flak alleys, concentrated zones of anti-aircraft fire around their most valuable targets. The sky would become a solid wall of exploding steel, and tracer fire to fly through it seemed suicidal. But the night witches developed a counter. They would fly straight into the flak, then at the last second execute a sharp, gut-wrenching turn that the heavy German guns could not follow. They used their agility as a shield. The stress was unimaginable. Pilots like Popova had their planes shot to ribbons on multiple occasions. She once returned with 42 bullet holes in her plane, her map torn to shreds, but herself unharmed. The psychological warfare was a two-way street. The women learned that the sound of their engine terrified the Germans, so they began to use it. They would fly low over German positions, the puttering engine acting as a siren of psychological torment. Even if they weren't bombing, they would drop whistling devices attached to their bombs, creating a terrifying shriek as they fell. They were not just dropping explosives, they were dropping fear itself. A German soldier's diary entry from the period read, "We cannot sleep. We cannot rest. These Russian women, they are not human." By 1943, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment was one of the most decorated units in the Red Air Force. They were no longer an experiment. They were a vital weapon. They fought through the brutal campaigns of Stalingrad, the Kuban, and the Crimea. Their reputation was such that Soviet infantry commanders would specifically request night witch support to soften up German positions before an assault. The male pilots, who had once mocked them, now looked at them with a mixture of awe and respect. They had earned it in blood and courage, but the cost was horrific. The Night Witches flew over 23,000 missions collectively. They dropped over 3,000 tons of bombs and 26,000 incendiary devices. They suffered heavy losses. Of the original recruits, many did not survive the war. Their flimsy planes were death traps if caught in a direct hit. They were shot down. They crashed in bad weather. They vanished without a trace. When a plane failed to return, the women would hold a small, somber ceremony. They did not mourn with tears, but with a silent, grim resolve. The empty cot in the barracks was a stark reminder that the next mission could be their last. Their heroism was officially recognized. 23 of the flyers were awarded the highest honor of the Soviet Union, the Hero of the Soviet Union Gold Star. Marina Ruskova herself would not live to see the final victory. In 1943, her plane crashed in bad weather while leading a transfer to the front, killing everyone on board. She was given a state funeral, and her ashes were interred in the Kremlin wall, a martyr for the motherland and a symbol of the sacrifice of all the women who flew. When the war ended in 1945, the Night Witches had carved their names into history with fire and courage. They were disbanded and returned to civilian life. In the post-war Soviet Union, their story was often downplayed, their incredible achievements slowly fading from official memory. But the legend persisted. The German soldiers who had faced them never forgot the sound of the wooden biplanes in the night. For the Wehrmacht, the Nachthexen remained a unique and terrifying phenomenon, a nightmare woven from wood, canvas, and the unbreakable will of young women. The story of the 588th is more than a tale of military effectiveness. It is a story of radical transformation. In the crucible of total war, these women shattered every preconception about gender and combat. They were not just supporting the war effort. They were on the front lines facing the same dangers, inflicting the same damage, and suffering the same losses as any male unit. They proved that courage, skill, and determination were not the sole province of men. They were pioneers who flew a path for future generations, not with the most advanced technology, but with the most formidable weapon of all, an unconquerable spirit. So, the next time you look up at a quiet, starry night, remember the sound that once haunted the darkness over the Eastern Front. Not the roar of a jet or the scream of a dive bomber, but the soft, whispering rustle of canvas and wood, the sound of young women flying into the heart of the enemy's darkness and becoming the nightmare they so feared. They were the Night Witches, and their story is a testament to the fact that in the annals of war, the most powerful force is not always the biggest gun, but the fiercest heart. If you believe that the greatest stories of courage are often the ones almost forgotten, leave a comment below with the hashtag #NightWitches and subscribe to Chronicles Unfolded, because history's most incredible missions are still waiting for their story to be told.